misconception about the Irish terrorists in the United States, that somehow they are interesting little leprechaun-like people with Barry Fitzgerald brogues who really aren't doing anything bad. But when they're exporting Uzi machine guns, when they're trying to acquire surface-to-air missiles to shoot down helicopters, that's bad. And whether they have dust on their knees from coming from mass or not, it's still wrong.
The pitiful plight of the people in Northern Ireland is genuine. Despair epidemic. But the conditions are clearly used to dupe New Yorkers and other Americans into financing an arsenal for continued terrorism. The Provisional IRA, labeled the best equipped and most experienced terrorist organization in the Western world.
I think the only people guilty of using terrorist methods in this country are the British.
Defending ambush sniping and bombing, IRA supporters make much of what they allege to be the repressive countermeasures of the British Army and the RUC, Royal Ulster Constabulary. Certainly there have been overreaction episodes with innocent casualties. And the impoverished Catholics are still threatened by armed radicals from the Protestant side. But most of the phantom violence of recent years can largely be laid on the IRA. In only the past few weeks, 4 RUC officers have been killed and dozens wounded in IRA attacks. A routine police patrol in West Belfast carries the risk of a combat operation.
Up 175 radio, check over.
Patrols such as this in West Belfast, the dangerous areas, really amount to a moving target, constantly on patrol 24 hours a day. Here you really get a sense of what security means under the terrorist threat.
We don't get what we call the cowboy shoot. We don't get that anymore, which is the carload driving past and firing out of the cars they pass. The current trend now is to take over houses and hold the family hostage, and then to shoot from the house that are passing Land Rover or foot patrol. They're professional and they're fairly expert.
Through the years of trouble, the RUC has tripled in size to a force of 8,000, taking over more and more of the visible security duty from the British Army. It's become probably the most sophisticated police force in the world.
At 13:30 hours today, an explosion occurred. Report of 2 or 3 civilians having been injured. Over.
Daily, management of the ongoing guerrilla war is monitored through complex command centers. It's estimated the turmoil in Northern Ireland has cost a staggering $16 billion. The economic debris on top of all the bloodshed. The reign of terror also reaches south into the Republic of Ireland and east onto the British mainland. Scenes such as the killing of Lord Mountbatten and the other bloody episodes blamed on the IRA. July 20th last year, this plaque marks the spot in Hyde Park where a terrorist bomb killed 4 members of the Queen's Guard and wounded 12 more, plus 6 civilians. There was considerable public outrage, but despite such incidents, British public opinion still seems to support the military presence in Northern Ireland. The general fear is without the British Army there would be a bloodbath.
We are in Northern Ireland because the majority of the people want us to be in Northern Ireland, and without our presence there would be a civil war.
But IRA supporters persist in likening the British position in Northern Ireland to the U.S. stand in Vietnam. More bloodshed, eventual withdrawal. That's why New Yorker and alleged gun money supplier Michael Flannery has openly called for more British troop casualties.
If more coffins with young British soldiers went back to England, I was sure that the mothers and fathers of these boys would ask, what did they die for?
Flannery supports the current campaign of Irish-American groups here for the naming of a presidential envoy to mediate in Northern Ireland, a mission similar to those mounted for the Mideast and Central America. But it's extremely unlikely President Reagan would even attempt to intervene, and the British government is plainly cool to the idea. In endorsing the call for a U.S. envoy, many leading political figures in New York claim they want to see a peaceful solution of the Irish issue. But at the same time, they echo the very pro-IRA stance of Michael Flannery.
Against the brutal killing and assaults on young children by the British Army.
Do you equally deplore the bombing by the IRA, the activity of the IRA?
I deplore all violence.
Some see in the viewpoint of Flannery, Dillon, and so many others here a tunnel perception that completely ignores the broader implications of IRA links to international terrorism. The joint training in Libya and Lebanon, the car bomb expertise that sources say the IRA shared with the PLO and other terrorists. It is from this wider scope that the Thatcher government is currently trying in Parliament to broaden existing terrorist laws beyond Northern Ireland. Under the first Prevention of Terrorism Act enacted here by the British Parliament just 9 years ago this month, It is a criminal offense to be a member of the IRA. The law also provides restrictions on travel and empowers the police to detain suspected terrorists. The act must be renewed each year, thus giving an opportunity to recycle the debate over whether tougher measures might be needed.
There's no sign that this act has had any effect at all in reducing terrorist outrages.
It's not as if we've been immune to this threat of international terrorism, and I think we ought to be as equipped as best we can to deal with it.
The carefully crafted circle of terrorist connections is of increasing concern in this country, too. Only last month, the bombing at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, with apparent linkage to New York terrorist groups, served to show that no institution is really immune to the threat. Curbing the terrorist forces at work beneath the surface in New York and other American cities is a subject of ongoing debate in the Congress. Is available intelligence accurate? Are adequate defenses in place for the next predicted cycle of high-tech terrorism? And finally, if convinced of the danger, are the American people ready to accept tougher measures to shield them, even if it means some meddling in civil liberties?
I believe that the most liberal Democrat or Republican on the floor, were the level of knowledge on the floor increased 15% over what it is now, there would be a tremendous shift in sentiment in the other direction.
We may have a time when we're going to have to face up to the kinds of problems that will probably, I must say reluctantly and sadly, will be visited upon our own society.
We do not have a unified intelligence service to start with. We have the FBI that's charged with domestic law enforcement, and we have the Central Intelligence Agency, which has no domestic law enforcement responsibility whatsoever, okay, and it is not a law enforcement agency, it's an intelligence agency.
Yeah, there's going to be terrorism in New York. There's been terrorism in New York. We're going to have to face it. We're going to have to cope with these things.
Washington-based expert Robert Kupperman suggests coping with terrorism not only with laws, but with spies, training the sites of foreign-style espionage on domestic terror activities with some reservations.
We may have to, God forbid, use a CIA someday.
Domestically.
We may have to use clandestine means to protect ourselves. How do you do this and still preserve our principles of justice and not act irrationally? You know, I have no Solomon-like thoughts on the matter. I just don't want us driven into overreaction to the point that none of us can live as free citizens.
Coming up, tracking the terrorist footprints to Italy, where tougher laws finally blunted the bloodshed of the Red Brigades, and further New York connections to international terrorism.